I'm 26 years old, and this year I settled on a house. I'd been living with my roommates for the past 8 years or so. Seclusion is something I really value, so finally buying a home all for myself was a big accomplishment for me. It was in a neighboring town, about 2 hours out from where I used to live. This town was much smaller in scale and had far fewer buildings. That's not to say that every house was on a farm or anything like that. The neighborhoods were definitely not full of close-together rows of houses like a suburb or something, though. They were spread out and separated by fields of trees and grasslands. The home I bought was no exception. It was modest and amongst the less expensive side of the housing market in this area. It was out in a forest a few miles away from the market center in town. On the day I moved in, I still hadn't met anyone in the area, not the neighbors nor the townspeople, and with the house being so far out with trees blocking the surrounding view, it kind of felt like I was moving out into the middle of nowhere, completely alone. Saying it like that makes it sound more eerie than it really felt at the time, but it wasn't all that comforting of a thought either. I had a rental van for the day, so I got to work right away unloading my things into the house. I wanted to be as quick as possible. I tried to put pretty much everything right in the living room, rather than sorting it as I went. This took a few hours, and the sun was swiftly going down. Just as I finished up, it was about ready to set. I set down a few boxes in the home and started walking out to the driveway for the last few things inside. I was caught off guard to see a man standing on my porch, almost blocking the entire front door. He really startled me, making me jump in surprise before showing a bit of embarrassment. I asked what the man was there for. The man looked to be about 50 or so. He smiled and introduced himself as my new neighbor. I said it was nice to meet him and gave him a polite smile. I couldn't help but think about how I'd never seen him walking up the driveway to my home. In fact, I had no idea where he'd come from, given it was just forest around my house. The man stayed there just kind of looking at me for a second, then turned and walked off my porch. I stood there and soaked in the strangeness of that encounter. After a moment, though, I stepped back outside and quickly got the rest of the boxes into the home. I peeked out the windows to make sure the man was actually gone. I didn't see him anywhere around. After a minute, I went out and got into the van, driving it down the long dirt driveway. It had only been a couple of minutes since the man had left, yet I didn't see him anywhere as I drove down the main road. There were no other paths I was aware of, so this made me a lot more uneasy. Anyway, I returned the van and hopped a local taxi back home, then started in on the unpacking. I wasn't working that fast. I was already tired and it was pretty late. I wanted to get some furniture put together before calling it a night. I grabbed the pieces to my bed frame and lugged them into my bedroom, beginning to piece it together. Right as I was figuring it out, a sudden knock interrupted me. I stopped and listened in to see if there would be any further sounds. I got up and quietly walked to the front door. I kept the door shut and locked, but looked out the peephole. I saw the exact same man from earlier during the day, but this time there was something wrong with him, more so than before even. He was shaking his head, moving around in an unnatural way. His eyes were fixated on the doorknob. He was staring at it so intensely it was like he was trying to burn a hole through it. He was standing quite close to the door as well, as if waiting for me to open it. "Hey, it's your neighbor. Can you open the door?" he yelled. Then he knocked again. I still remained on the other side, looking through the peephole. When I didn't answer, his face began to show frustration and anger. He banged on the door one more time, then turned and faced the pitch-black forest. He looked out into the darkness and held his hand up. He did some sort of motion, followed by him running out into the forest in the direction he'd waved at. Terrified, I immediately called the police. It was too late for them to find and question the man, though. After that night, I never saw him again. Even to this day, now that I've met all my neighbors, of course none of them were that man. And none of my neighbors knew who he could possibly be either. In fact, nobody in the entire town seemed to recognize him, at least not from my description. I don't know who the man was signaling to in the forest, or even how many people could have been out there waiting for the man to gain my trust and get me to open the door. What would have happened afterwards, I believe, is best left unthought of. I was driving on the empty highway, fighting to keep my eyes open. It was well past 1 a.m., and I couldn't help but look at the GPS every few seconds, hoping the estimated arrival time would somehow go down faster. I'd been on the road for a dangerous 15 hours straight, only stopping for food and gas on the way to my new home. I'd been forced to move for work, yet funnily enough, it was work that never let me make a trip to see the place I'd be moving to. Finally, though, I made it to the highway exit and into the town I'd be living in from then on. It was dark, so it wasn't exactly easy to see what everything looked like, but I could see enough to tell it wasn't as good as where I'd lived before. Most of the buildings looked like locally owned and run shops that were far from what I was used to. Along with that, most of the lights were off as well. When I got to my neighborhood, though, it didn't seem all that bad. The houses seemed pretty regular, sectioned close to each other. I pulled up to my house and parked on the side of the road. I got out to see the place I'd be calling home for the next year. From the outside, it looked just like all the others, but what really mattered was the inside. I walked up the driveway and pulled out the key I'd been sent a few days ago. I put it in the lock and turned it, but there was no click. I grabbed the handle and pressed on the door, watching it glide open. It was already unlocked. I quickly went in and looked around to make sure my things were there. The movers had dropped off everything in the morning, so I didn't want anything to have been stolen. After a quick look around, nothing seemed to be missing, though. It was likely the movers had simply forgotten to lock the place up after. Something was still giving me a bad feeling, though. On top of all that, the lights and electricity didn't seem to be working. I knew I was supposed to set it up in town at some point. It was obviously too late to do that tonight, though. I didn't think they would just cut the power on my first day there. I turned my phone light on and started looking through the rooms. The downstairs was pretty okay, standard looking and with a slightly older feel to it. I made my way up to the second floor. At the top of the stairs was a long hallway with 5 doors. I stepped into each of the rooms one by one, shining my phone light around. They were all very small, and a lot of them had water damage on the ceilings and walls. When I opened the door to the master bedroom, I was surprised to see a single tarp laying on the floor. It looked dirty, maybe like something the movers had used to wrap furniture with. What made it so odd, though, was that there was nothing at all upstairs aside from that tarp. All the furniture and boxes were downstairs. I took a step back and closed the door. I was already so tired. I just wanted this night to be over with. I didn't really want to crowd my mind with the uncertainties of moving here. I went back downstairs and sat on one of the sofa chairs that was still wrapped up in plastic. I tried to rest my eyes. My eyes jolted open, though, as a sudden thud echoed throughout the home from above me. I honestly didn't even know if I'd fallen asleep or not. All I remembered was sitting down and closing my eyes for a moment. The sound was quite harsh, though, not just some small bump in the night. I stood up and went to the bottom of the stairs. Looking up at the dark hallway of that house, it was so silent and eerie. I must have stood there for a whole minute before taking my phone out and turning on the flashlight. I slowly walked up the creaky stairs, and when I got to the top of the steps, I shined the light down the hallway. I immediately noticed the door at the far end was slightly open, and there was an unmistakable outline of a figure standing between the crack in the doorway. They were looking right at me. I almost fell backwards down the steps. My immediate reaction was to turn and run. I sprinted for the front door and straight out into the driveway and into my car. I thought about driving away, but knowing literally all of my belongings were inside that house, I wanted to make sure whoever was in there didn't just snatch up everything. I called 911 and waited for their arrival on the side of the road. During the whole 5 minutes it took them to get there, I never saw any movement in the windows, nor anyone leaving the front door. When the police searched the house, though, the back door was wide open. It was obvious to them that whoever that was had been living inside the house for quite a while, probably because it had been vacant over the past couple of months. At first, I thought they were talking about the attic, since I looked through all the rooms and saw nothing but a tarp, but there was no attic. They were talking about the master bedroom. That meant that when I was looking around upstairs that night, and I opened the door to that room, that person was hiding somewhere in there, probably right behind the door itself. If I'd gone in any further inside the room to investigate the tarp and look around, there's a chance they might have done something to stop me. A couple of years ago, I went to the Grand Canyon during the summertime. I went there on a road trip with my best friend Amanda. I had never been to the Grand Canyon before, but she had been there once when she was younger. We drove on this one road for a long time that was supposed to lead to the park. Once we entered, we followed another road into one of the main parking lots. I was surprised at just how big the park was. There were various campsites on it, and several trails as well. When we got there were quite a few other people. We went down one trail to see the actual canyon. There are several walking trails alongside it, and many different lookout areas as well. We walked along it and stopped at several of those lookout spots, many of which were pretty crowded. At probably the second or third one we stopped at, I got approached by this random guy. He was a man that was sort of big with dark hair. He said hello to me and told me his name was Joe. He then asked me if me and Amanda would be interested in going on a tour and said that he led a guided tour around these parts. I wasn't too interested myself, so I said no thanks. He then asked me again if I was sure, and I said yes once more. After that, he just walked away. We took a bunch of pictures and stuff and moved along. About 15 minutes later, I would say, we were at another overlook area. There were other people there as well, but not nearly quite as many as before. I noticed that same guy, Joe. He was walking over and approached us again. This time, he said he'd forgotten to mention that the tour was free because somebody else had apparently canceled. He asked once more if we wanted to go. I thought about it for a second, but I still didn't want to go with this random guy. I said no to him. He asked if we were sure again, and we both said yes. He walked away just like before. This whole thing seemed a little bit strange, especially because he didn't bother to ask anybody else. He just asked us and then walked away. Amanda and I stayed at the lookout spot for a couple more minutes after that. We kept walking along the canyon and looking out at different viewpoints. I remember that sometime later, we stopped at another spot and saw Joe yet again, a little ways away. I was afraid he was going to approach us once more, but he didn't do so. He was with another guy, and they were just kind of standing around acting shady. Amanda and I walked in a different direction. There were a few paths that went through some nearby areas, and not as many people were on these ones. We walked down a couple of them. I remember that about halfway down one of them, I saw Joe again. He was walking a ways behind us, and that's when I started to get really weirded out by him. It still didn't seem like a huge deal. There were still some other people around, and the paths were not super avoided or anything. We later went back to the canyon again and didn't see him. We finished up at the gift shop, and each of us got some souvenirs. Out of nowhere, guess who I noticed again? It was Joe. He was with his friend from earlier. He didn't try to approach us, but it was a strange coincidence seeing him everywhere we'd gone throughout the entire day. Whatever tours they were supposed to be giving, they were apparently not doing so. By the time we got our souvenirs, it was starting to get late out. The sun was setting, and we decided to drive back. Our hotel was over an hour away. We went back to my car and what I assume is the main parking lot. As we were getting in and preparing to leave, I saw the two guys once again. They were a long ways away and just entering the lot. I kept an eye on them because I was very suspicious at this point. I noticed them begin observing us. They went over to an old SUV, which was parked on the other side of the lot. Is that what they were supposed to be giving tours in? I wasn't really buying the whole tour story at all. I was feeling really glad we hadn't said yes to them. We got inside my car and started to leave. As we were driving down the road though, the SUV the guys were driving followed in right behind us. If my memory is correct, there's really just one main highway that leads to and from the Grand Canyon. There isn't a whole lot on it for like an hour either though. Just outside the park area, there are a few restaurants and gas stations, so we decided to stop and grab some gas. My car's tank was a little low, and we didn't know where the next opportunity to fill up would be. We didn't know if the guys would continue to follow us either. As we pulled into the gas station, they pulled in right behind us. Now we were really concerned. I started filling my car with gas, and the SUV parked in a spot on the side. Nobody attempted to get out and refuel or anything. I finished up. Amanda and I decided to go inside the store. The gas station was pretty large inside. We were browsing around through some stuff to idle time when we noticed the same two men sneaking inside. We tried to avoid them, and they didn't seem to be trying to approach us or anything, but I knew this wasn't a coincidence. We got a few things and left the store. As we left, we noticed the guys immediately leaving right behind us. We hurried and jumped into the car. The guys went back to their SUV. As I left, unfortunately, they followed right after us. We both went onto the main highway leaving the Grand Canyon. There weren't really any exits, but I tried slowing down, speeding up, changing lanes. Whatever I did, the SUV remained right behind us. We were thinking of what to do. After a while, we got the idea to drive to a police station directly. Unfortunately, there was not one for a while. Over the next few minutes, things remained the same. We drove with them following us until we were finally off the highway. We then headed to the nearest police station. Luckily, the SUV did not attempt to follow us into the station itself. After that, we reported what happened. We gave a description of the guys. However, we did not get their license plate number. After that, we made it back to our hotel just fine. I'm really glad we got away from those guys. Who knows what they were planning? It was the fall of 2018 when this happened to me. I was 22, and at the time I was living temporarily on the East Coast, right outside of the Appalachian mountain range. I'll go ahead and admit right now that I've never been too much of an outdoorsy person. I hadn't had any experience in camping. nor was I really interested in those sorts of activities anyway. However, this was my last year living in probably the best place to do all those outdoor things. Plus, with it being mid-fall, the environment looking so pretty, and the weather being so nice, I figured this was my one chance to try it out. Now, I didn't want to go on a huge camping adventure or anything. I simply found a simple hiking trail instead. It had some good views of the mountains, and I prepped a small backpack with some water, snacks, and a first aid kit. No cars were there when I arrived. It was just a small dirt parking area really, so I guess this wasn't really a popular trail. At least not as much as I thought it was. I parked and started walking down it. It was pretty calm, and it definitely didn't feel like a path a lot of people would take. It didn't have any noticeable recent shoe prints in the dirt, and it was a fairly small path. There were trees on either side, obscuring vision a bit. As I got further in, the entire path became more densely covered in trees, enough to even blot out the sun and make the whole trail look quite dark. It was actually pretty nice and cooling, but not hearing or seeing anyone else became a bit more unsettling the further out I got. Not exactly in a creepy way, but in an I'm all alone out here way. It wasn't something I was used to, not being around any other people. About an hour, or maybe even 2 hours down the trail, I was caught off guard by suddenly seeing a man up ahead of me. He was just sitting on the side of the path, looking like he was taking a break underneath a tree. As I passed him by, I gave him a friendly nod and said hello. He looked up at me but didn't say anything. He didn't smile or nod either. He just looked at me for a few seconds and I looked away. I wasn't sure what to make of that behavior. Maybe he didn't hear me, or maybe I'd caught him off guard as well. The strange look without even a slight smile, though, was not giving me a good feeling. I walked a bit faster for the next part of the trail, hoping to put some distance in between us. After an hour, I slowed down and made it to the end, which was an overlook of the mountains. The fall colors on the trees made the view way better than it would have been at any other time of the year. Overall, I was glad to have made the hike. I stared off into the distance for a few minutes, enjoying a view I would probably never get to see again. When I turned around, though, my heart just about leapt out of my body. I saw the man from earlier, standing right at the end of the trail. He was about 10 feet from me. I'd never even heard him walking behind me. After the initial scare, I realized how creepy it was that he was just standing there blocking the path, not coming out to look out the overlook like a normal person would be doing. He then did something even more odd. His face shifted as he gave a strained smile. "How's the view?" he asked. "Yeah, it's really nice. You should take a look too." I tried to be polite, but I was still more confused than anything. The man stepped closer, then pointed to my right. "There's an even better view down that trail, if you want to see." I looked over my shoulder to where he was pointing. There was a path that was barely visible, going through a patch of dense trees. It was rugged and undefined, not something that looked to be used very often. The man walked up to where the path started and stood at the entrance, telling me again about how great the view I would experience was, and saying it was just a minute or two walk into the woods to get there. I tried to decline, but he continued to insist how great it was. It became obvious he had other intentions than just wanting me to go there and see a nice view. I said I had to go home now, and started to walk toward the main trail. The man was quick to move his body to block it once more. I stopped in place, now even more terrified. I was thinking of the possible intentions of this man. He was just a few feet away from me, and we were stuck in the middle of an empty forest. The man looked at me with a 1,000-yard stare. I took a few steps walking around him and hoping he would not escalate the situation. For some miraculous reason, it didn't. The man simply let me go, and I made my way around him, back down the trail. Every time I looked back at him, he was watching me, not even trying to be discreet. Thankfully, he made no attempt to follow me. I made it back to my car just fine in the end. I don't know what that man was trying to do, but surely not anything good was down that path. Likely just a dead end. Somewhere for him to lead me before either killing me or doing something even worse, whatever horrible thing he had in mind. I don't know why he didn't try to stop me from leaving either. We were all alone there. Maybe he was worried about doing something on a main trail. All I can say is I'm lucky to have gotten out before he did something horrible to me. A few years ago, I was traveling by myself. I took a flight to Phoenix for some business that I hoped to do there for the 2 nights I would be in town. I was staying outside of downtown in a pretty standard hotel. It wasn't exactly fancy, but it wasn't a cheap place either. It was perfectly fine. It had the basic bed, TV, desk, chair, bathroom. After I checked in, I grabbed my room key and went inside. I had a couple hours before I had to go anywhere, so I just went on my laptop in my room, then left for a few hours. I was out in the city doing my business, and when I came back to my room, it was at night. After arriving back, I entered my room again and set my things down. It was precisely as I was in the middle of doing this that all of a sudden a man stood up from behind my bed. I had no idea who this man was. He was wearing a black sleeveless shirt and jeans. He was bald with a big goatee. I asked the man what the hell he was doing in here. The man did not say anything. He started to slowly walk toward me. I backed away and went for the door. He actually sprinted after me as I did this. I managed to slip out of the room and out into the hallway. I ran to the left where the front doors were. After making it into the lobby, I saw the guy was not chasing me anymore. I told the employee at the front desk about the situation, and she said she would call the police for me right away. I waited in the lobby until they got there. The entire time waiting, we didn't see the man at all. The police got there within 10 minutes. When they searched my room, obviously the man was gone. They searched throughout the entire hotel as well, and they didn't find a single trace of him. He'd probably left through one of the back exits. After going back to my room, I was slightly relieved to see that none of my things had been stolen. It also greatly unnerved me though. If he hadn't been there to steal anything, then what had he been there for? When all the commotion was gone and the police had left, I was left all by myself. About an hour later, I just so happened to glance out my window when I saw the man walking through the parking lot. My window looked out to the back parking area. The lot back there had not nearly as many cars as the one out front. It also backed up to the rear of a couple nearby businesses. The man was walking from the hotel parking lot to the parking lot of another business. He disappeared out of my line of sight. I thought about reporting the sighting or something, but figured he would be long gone by the time anybody got there again. That night, I triple-checked my door was locked. I made sure my window was locked too, and covered it up with a sheet. The rest of the time I stayed there was fine though, and I didn't encounter the man again. I still wonder how he got into my room and what he was trying to do there. It's entirely possible he'd been hiding in the room with me earlier for the couple of hours I'd been there after arriving. He may have come in later, but I'll never have the opportunity to know. When I was 10 years old, I had a really freaky thing happen in my house. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, really thirsty. It was around 1 in the morning or so, and the entire house was dark. I got out of bed and went downstairs to grab myself a drink. Rather conveniently, my mom had just gotten up to do the same thing as well. We headed downstairs to the kitchen for some water together. Right when we got to the kitchen area though, a random car pulled up into our driveway and a man jumped out. My mom and I were just standing in the kitchen watching him. He very aggressively stomped up to our front door. He was wearing a hoodie and black gloves. Real big burly dude. Right before he started to try and open it, my mom flipped on the light. Since the entire house was dark, the man couldn't see us, but we could see him. The instant the light flipped on, the man stopped and looked right back at us. He paused for a moment as if thinking over what to do, then ran back to his car and hauled ass out of our driveway and down the road. We never saw the man again. I don't know if he was trying to break in or what, but I had nightmares about it for weeks after. Really scared the shit out of me. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.